There's some debate about what the best strategies are in the board game Monopoly, so today I'd like to share with you the top 10 most important ideas you need to know to win this game, and I'll do it in 12 and a half minutes here on Legendary Tactics. This strategy guide will teach you about the odds in the game, which properties are the best, how to maximize profits and manage your money, how to handle both mortgages and the people at the table, and also give you some tips to help you at different stages in the game. Let's start with number 10, buying property. The game is played in phases. There are two schools of thought on the early phase. Some think you should know the odds and only focus on getting high frequency properties on the board, while others think you should buy everything you have the chance to buy. We'll talk about the odds in number 9, but the main rule here is just buy everything you can buy. There are 3 good reasons for this. Number 1, others will start paying you income, which in turn depletes their money. Number 2, the more properties you get, the more you increase your negotiation power later in the game, which sets up opportunities to broker trades that can benefit you later on. And number 3, buying properties begins to build infrastructure so you can work towards accumulating sets. And that's the whole point of the game, is to get sets, get a monopoly, and get houses on the board. Holding on to your money does little for you in the early game while everyone else is establishing their position on the board and while rents are few and far between. So buy everything, even if you have to mortgage it. Remember, there are only 32 houses available, and when they're gone, they're gone. So the more you buy, the faster you can get a set and the more pressure you put on your opponents by depleting the house supply. And remember, by the official rules, if you don't buy a property, it goes up for auction and one of your opponents is likely to buy it. Number 9, one of the criticisms of this game is that there's a lot of luck and the outcome of the game is purely determined by the dice. I disagree. That may be the case if you don't know what you're doing, but if you've got a good grasp on probabilities and the odds in the game, you'll greatly improve your chances of getting lucky. Also, you do need to understand how to play against the people. We'll get to that later in the video. While luck does influence one part of the game, there's a good reason that some players consistently win, while others flip the table and storm off in frustration and say this game's all luck. Statistically, the dice will yield 7s more than any other number, followed by 6s and 8s, then 5s and 9s, and so on. The least likely rolls on 2 dice are 2 and 12, as there's only one way to get each of these. So what does this mean? Well, some spaces on the board are more likely to have players land on them. Starting from go, your odds of rolling a 6, an 8, or a 9, which land you on light blue streets, are quite high. It's 39% probability. The space that players will land on most is jail, and there are a lot of different ways to get there, including 2 cards, rolling doubles 3 times, and the go to jail square. So by the same logic, players are more likely going to land on the orange streets, which are 1 roll or approximately 7 spaces away. So the 4th side of the board, from green Pacific Avenue to the blue boardwalk, take an average of 5 rolls to get there from the beginning of the game, assuming you don't get descent to any other squares and that you make it past the go to jail space. So these are less desirable places to own property. The other 3 sides of the board are considered the hot parts of the board, and these are the cool parts of the board. On to number 8, the best properties. So it's not just the odds of landing on a location that matter in this game. Pairing our knowledge of the odds with an awareness of cards like Advance to St. Charles Place, which is statistically 1 roll away from orange, or the Go Back 3 Spaces cards, which often put you on New York Avenue, and then the Advance to the Nearest Utility card. That puts you on Electric Company 2 out of 3 times. Again, that's 1 roll away from orange. So this makes orange the best streets on the board to own. There's an 8.8% chance of people landing on orange, and it earns back what you paid for it faster than any other color. The second best option is red, with an 8.7% probability of people landing on it because it's in a high frequency location on the board. And also, Illinois Avenue is statistically the most visited property. Like orange, it also yields strong returns on your investments. While I personally like the light blue set because it's 1 roll away from go, the yellow properties actually have a higher probability of people landing on them. That's 7.9%, and also it has better returns on your investment than light blue. A lot of people argue that dark blue is really good too, but because it's on the cool part of the board, I'm not as fond of that. Since you don't get to choose where you'll end up on the board and who may or may not have bought the property by getting there first, if in doubt, return and revert to rule number 10 and just buy it. Number 7, board awareness. So what are the sweet spots for making money? To win this game, you need a monopoly. That's the foundation. To maximize your profits, you should put 3 houses on your monopolies as quickly as you can. When you drop the 3rd house down, the rent grows exponentially, which really starts to gouge your opponents. If you can get the houses down when many opponents are within 1 roll or approximately 7 spaces of landing on your development, then you can strategically amplify your earnings at the right time. So timing is really critical on when you slam those houses down. This is potentially huge, but it requires that you have strong board awareness as to where players are at on the board when you make specific deals to acquire the properties you need to hose your opponents. Number 6, building. So should you be aiming for houses or hotels? When the houses run out, as I've mentioned, your opponents can no longer place them. So it goes without saying, if you can create a scarcity of housing, you'll limit your opponent's options. You should think of houses as permanent investments. Keeping them on the board is the primary path to victory. So are hotels worth the investment? Well, they may be very tempting. They look really cool and it's kind of illustrious to be the first one to get one down, but you generally shouldn't buy them. Buying hotels counteracts the scarcity strategy. They just put more houses back into the pool or the market for your opponents to buy. The only time to build hotels is if there's a huge supply of houses on the market already. By the way, if this video is helpful to you and you're enjoying our content, please consider liking it and subscribing to our channel. It really helps us out a lot. Number 5, railroads and utilities. So how useful are railroads? Well, as a set of 4, they can score you $200 every time someone lands on it, and you really earn quite a bit of cash that way. If you're playing with strong players, they'll often block you from getting the 4th. So this strategy will depend on how much risk you want to take and who the players are at the table. It's going to change from game to game, and that's why I can't give you one definitive piece of advice in terms of railroads. It depends on the players, depends on the board state, depends on how often you land on them early on. So will they notice and allow you to get all 4? Most of the time they probably won't, because they want to win, and you having all 4 will cause you to win. You'll get rich very quickly that way. Railroads are also more valuable in 2-player games because you have a better chance of concentrating ownership, or you also get to block your opponent from completing the set. I'd also suggest that they're stronger in the early and mid game because they can't be upgraded with structures. So let's move to utilities. Are they worth buying? Well, for starters, they can't be upgraded, so you don't get added exponential value down the road like you would when you buy a street and you can add houses to it. So they do bring in some passive income, but they're not likely the key to winning the game. So if you've got extra cash, you're flush, sure, you can buy them. It's fine, but the main value that they bring is when you negotiate trades. Otherwise, I wouldn't be rushing to get them. Number 4, mortgages. So we've already established that it's better in the early game to have income generating properties on the board than it is to have a mitt full of cash that just makes you feel good about not being broke. But in the late game, you need more disposable cash when you have to pay rents, so that as the game progresses, be sure you keep some cash on hand so you can absorb a bad roll. If you're stuck, it's better to take out a mortgage than it is to sell a house. Remember, houses are permanent investments on the board. If you find yourself in the position that you need to take out a mortgage on a property that doesn't have any buildings, you should do so in the following order. Number 1, properties you're planning to trade. You can't build houses on properties if any of its street set has a mortgage, but that doesn't matter if you're trading it away. In fact, it actually adds some inconvenience to the recipient, so bear that in mind. Number 2, properties between go to jail and go. As I've mentioned, these properties are on the cool part of the board, so you're less likely to earn income here. Number 3, a single utility. It's better not to destabilize your monopolies because you need to be getting houses on the board. Instead, just sacrifice the utilities. Number 4, a single railroad. They're weak on their own, or even if you only have 2 or 3 of them, and they're really not that much of a loss. Number 5, both utilities. Again, not great properties, so not a great loss. As we move into the top 3 strategies for Monopoly, if you think I've missed any key strategies or if you'd like to build on ones that I've covered, please take a moment to add a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts and love to debate some of these questions with you. Number 3, playing the people and negotiating. This is a really undervalued part of the game for many people who believe it's luck-driven. Much of the fun of this game comes from wheeling and dealing, buying and selling cards or properties, auctioning and bidding, and establishing a strong rapport with fellow players. Don't undervalue your relationships at the table. If you're a jerk to other players pointing out every time they missed collecting a rent or bragging about how much money you have, you may not find yourself in a position to make deals. And if you're playing with competitive players, no one at the table will go out of their way to help you complete a set unless they get something really good in return. In fact, many players at the higher levels choose to speak very, very little in the game, and it doesn't cause opposition between players, and they can hopefully fly under the radar. But if you're playing with competitive players, no one at the table will go out of their way to help you complete a set unless they get something really good in return. So how do you prepare your opponents to want to help you? Now, while an immunity deal would likely not stand up to scrutiny at a Monopoly tournament, one option available to you that doesn't explicitly break the official Monopoly rules is to choose not to charge rent to a player who lands on your space. You would do this by simply not asking for rent. You might also consider trading a complete color group to another player, but also remember that if you consistently forget to charge one player or you offer overly sweet deals, the other players at the table are not likely to be happy about it, and you might sabotage those relationships. On to number 2, jail. Early in the game, paying $50 fast to get out of jail and start buying properties again is super important. However, when there are monopolies on the board, it can get very costly to do the loop later in the game. So jail can actually be a welcome refuge. You still get to collect rent from others looping the board and landing on your spaces while you enjoy some rent-free accommodation. So don't rush to bribe the jailers to release you as the game progresses. Number 1, money management. While broadly this sounds self-evident, there are some subtleties to this. The game depends very much on how you manage your money. Should you save it and spend it carefully? Should you spend it as fast as you can earn it? Well, if you go bankrupt, you lose a lot of resources, not to mention the game, so it's best not to run yourself too much in the red as the game progresses. Another tip for you is to not reveal how much money you have. Hide your big bills in the middle of your stack. When you boast about your wealth by laying it in neat stacks on the board and showing it off, it's a way to ensure that the other players will avoid helping you in any form. If you choose not to buy a property, remember in the real rules for the game, it will go up for auction. And as we know, auctions often result in 2 outcomes: winning the property for a pittance, or they can have the opposite effect, which causes players to overbid. So strategically, you need to know when each of these outcomes is likely to happen. How this turns out will depend on how you interact with players at the table. If you're aware of how much money other players have, you may want to force auctions for a couple of reasons. You can get properties at reduced prices if everybody else is broke, or you can force players who really need a specific property to run out of cash by overbidding. This is going to come to your judgment in the game, but just be aware of that. Also, really important, keep a sharp eye out to collect your rents. It's up to you to ask for rent, not your opponents to do that for you. Remember, Monopoly is a profoundly human game, and there's so much more to winning than just rolling dice and counting bills. Thanks so much for your time, and come again when you can stay a little longer.